All of the following boats were designed by the same man back in GDR, East Berlin. His name is Manfred Ernst. During his career, spanning over more than 4 decades, he made hundreds of new boat drafts, leading to tens of thousands of manufactured boats, and became one of the most influential boat builders of the German post-war era. Across his many designs, he remained loyal to certain design elements, such as the trapezoidal side windows, the rounded bow, which falls off abruptly to a steep V-shape towards the keel. His designs were so popular that for a long period of time they were responsible for a majority of all the builds in the East Berlin shipyard. To this day, his boats are a common sight on the Berlin waterways, as they are simply good boats and usually very affordable. Some specimens, however, depending on their condition and the quality of the materials used for their build, can achieve surprisingly high sales values. And so, it is no surprise that when I was looking for a guest boat, I was looking for a so-called Ernst Riss. We went and checked out 2 boats. The first one was a bit smaller, great condition given its age. It looks similar to one of these, and I would estimate that it was built in the late 60s to early 70s. Like many Ernst Riss boats, it's a steel hull with a wooden structure built on top. I particularly like the shape and style of the windows on this one. The entire structure on top is made out of mahogany wood, and it's beautifully crafted and finished, which indicates that this boat indeed was built in a proper shipyard and not in the backyard of some wannabe boat builder. So in that regard alone, this boat is interesting. The forward cabin is fairly Spartanic, as it was customary in the GDR times. There's no running water, no toilet, no kitchen. Instead, the same beautiful mahogany structure, relatively effective curtains, and these beautiful caning patterns. For an engine, it has this tiny 3-cylinder gasoline engine, of which I forget the make and horsepower rating, but the fact that it's a gasoline engine is definitely a downside, at least for me. The upper deck is quite spacious for such a small boat. Once again, it's beautifully crafted, definitely the work of professionals. Sadly, the varnish is starting to come off almost everywhere, and while I do like the style and condition of this boat, it is a bit too small to serve as a guest boat. So let's continue our search and move on to the next location. We are here in a sleepy old town north of Berlin. The boat was located in a cute little shipyard/marina. And of course, what do we find right up front? A very well preserved Ernst Riss boat. But I'm not here to enjoy the romantic scenery. I came in fact to check out this boat. And as if the seller had planned it, the boat was standing right next to an old Trabant, which is of course the most popular car back in GDR, East Germany. It didn't take me long to realize that this boat too was built in a proper shipyard and that the wooden structure was in a very good state of preservation. There are of course some areas where the wood is a little rotten and some amount of rainwater is getting in, but I consider this very fixable. The boat offers sufficient space for a couple to live in comfortably. It has a gas stove, running water, and a head. There is a spacious V-berth in the bow, and there is a tiny aft cabin with 2 separate beds. Now, if you already think that this sounds too good to be true, then wait till you see the almost brand new Vitus diesel engine that the previous owner put in here shortly before selling the boat. The engine has a wet exhaust and the boat has hydraulic steering. Oddly, it seems to have an identical transmission as the boat we visited earlier that day. Below the waterline, everything looks alright. Propeller and rudder seem to be in great condition. A few patches here and there. No issues are visible at this point. The outer deck is quite dilapidated. While everything appears to be at the right place, for the most part, the paint is chipping away and the wood underneath is rotten in some areas. but according to the seller, the boat floats, the engine runs, so there should be nothing that prevents us from bringing this boat home. We came back about a week later to pick up the boat. We took a one-way train ticket because the plan was to go home with the boat. In the meantime, the seller had found an old folder which contained all the original construction plans of this boat. Now then, here we are back to put this boat into the water. The shipyard owner starts up the crane. This tractor, by the way, is also a real GDR legend by the name of Fortschritt, which means progress. Now that everything is cleared, let's get started. I always love a good boat craning, especially in such a cool setting as here, with this ancient auto crane hoisting the boat in the same way it did 40 years ago. And just imagine the excitement of the very first owner when this boat was craned for the first time back in GDR, East Germany. He may have had it on order for 10 years before it finally got delivered. And he would have been a man of high social rank, presumably a high-ranking party member, to even be eligible to purchase such a boat in the first place. But let's get back to the present day, where the current owner is excited to see his new boat get put into the water. As soon as the boat was floating, we went inside to check if any water was seeping in. Obviously, we checked the drive shaft, nothing was coming in there. We checked the bilges, aft, middle and front, and everything appeared to be tight. For now. Let's see if the engine starts. The fact that the engine is running definitely brings us a step closer to getting home with this boat today. And just when I did the last check before departing, I found that here in the aft cabin, all the way in the back, there is water seeping in from underneath. And so we had no choice but to take the boat back out. We found a couple of holes in the hull. Here you can see the water dripping back out. Once the boat was secured, we checked if there were potentially other holes in that area. And so, to move on from here, there were no two ways about it. Somebody had to weld this shut. Luckily, they had a gas welder very similar to the one I'm using recently. The boss cut out a patch. My friend put the welder in place, while I prepared the area for welding. First I removed the paint down to the bare steel. I prepare the patch together with a little bracket to hold it in place. I check if it fits. I make some final adjustments and then we proceed to welding. I figured out how the welder works. I tested it by welding the holding bracket to the patch. I tack weld the patch to the hull and then slowly but surely tried to familiarize myself with this welder. And I have to say, I was dreading the day where I had to weld a boat under the waterline all by myself, because now it's my responsibility alone, my personal skill level at the welder, that determines whether this boat will float or sink. Luckily, I had plenty of practice in the days and weeks leading up to this moment. And so, the result turned out pretty acceptable. I feel that I had proper penetration in all the welds. I believe that this patch was already watertight from welding alone. I cleaned it up with the angle grinder. Next I put everything on there that the guys at the marina had to offer. First some zinc spray. Next a zinc-based primer. And finally, we patched up the anti-fouling wherever necessary. And right as we finished painting also the patch, the guys were already hoisting the boat back into the water. Once back in the water, we checked the spot where the water came in earlier, and this time indeed everything remained dry. So let's get her ready for cruising. Close up the engine compartment. And so we went ahead on our first meters with this new boat. It took some time to figure out the best seating position because standing was not an option. So here I'm driving the boat in the first minutes after watering it, and to be honest, during this entire trip I only drove these few meters to get these camera shots before my friend took over for the entire rest of the trip. At some point we saw a sister boat of the old tugboat you saw in one of my previous videos. Once my friend took over, it was all smooth sailing from there. The trip is a very quiet series of smaller canals that widen up as we get closer to the city center. The weather was relatively fresh and unsettled, and there were a total of 7 or 8 waterlocks on a total distance of about 90 kilometers. Because we had to fix that leak, we lost a lot of time in our day, and it was becoming less and less likely that we were gonna make it back home still the same day. At the latest, when we noticed that we didn't have any navigation lights because of some fault in the electronics that we couldn't find at that moment, we tried to get as close as possible to home before stopping at one of the many waterlocks to spend the night. We managed to get all the way to the last waterlock before entering the city center, which is where we spent the night waiting for the waterlock to take operations back up in the early morning. And so off we went to the second last waterlock on this trip. You can see the water streets are getting wider, and we got company right at the outskirts of the inner city. My friend found that these were driving a bit too slow, however. Having been on the boat for over 20 hours at this point, we were starting to get a little impatient. Soon enough, we passed by all the iconic spots, and not before long, we arrived at the last waterlock of this trip. First to arrive, first to leave, we continue on to the last 30 minutes of this trip. And so, we drove calmly back to the place we call home. After my friend dropped me off at my boats, he put the new boat at its anchoring spot. Where she remains to this day. And we did of course already start to fix her up a little, but because we don't have time to do a full refit right now, our goal is to just preserve it until the coming winter. For now, we just tried to stop the water from getting into the boat to hopefully stop the wood from rotting in some areas. But that's a story for another video. And with that, my friends, we have reached the end of today's video. I hope you enjoyed the watching and that I will see you in the next video.